Wednesday, December 16th, the program Chris Fabry Live. The venue, your radio or your MP3 player. All coming to you from Moody Radio in Chicago and the International Broadcast Studios located near Tucson, Arizona. Welcome to my backyard fence. We call it Chris Fabry Live. And we gather here each day at this same time. We lean on you to make this program what it is. It really is something that is a partnership. So invite a friend to tune in and let's make it a little bit bigger partnership. You can go to our website and find out more about our guest today, chrisfabrylive.org. We'd love you to have to stop by there, chrisfabrylive.org. You spell the last name F-A-B as in Fab, F-A-B-R-Y, chrisfabrylive.org. Today we're going to discuss something that on the surface you might think, why are you talking about that at Christmas? Actually, that will carry through for the next 2 days. But I want you to stay with us and find out, what do gangs have to do with your life? You've heard the story about Darian Albert in Chicago weeks ago. That news story has settled a bit, but in large cities around the country and in not so large, gangs are a fact of life. It's something that happens all the time. There's a growing gang industry, if you want to call it that, that is spread throughout the country. And there's a man I want to talk with today who's trying to change that a life at a time. He has quite an interesting story. We'll talk with him in just a few minutes, so stay with us. Here's our number if you'd like to get in touch. 1-877-LIVE-675, 877-548-3675. Tricia McMillan is our producer today. Eric Hufford is our engineer, and answering your calls, the ever-faithful Josh Kloss. Great to have you back, Josh. Got a nice message on Facebook from Janelle. She wrote, I really like your show, Chris. My 8-month-old son and I look forward to hearing it throughout the week. We live in Grand Rapids, Michigan. And honestly, the cat is out of the bag. We really don't try to reach parents now. We're going for the 8-month-old. It's really 8 months to 2 years old that we're going for. That is our sweet spot. That's our target. Love those kids who listen. I know that some of you are younger, some of you are in middle school, and no matter what your mom or dad would put on the radio as you're being picked up from school, you wouldn't like it. But as you grit your teeth today, I hope you'll stay here because we try to be relevant, and I think we might be talking about something that will touch your life as well. If you had taken away from you the most dear thing in the world, and Darian Albert, this comes from the Washington Post. Darian Albert was a church-going honor student, and he refused to join a gang. He was on his way to catch a bus, and he was caught between two gangs fighting. He was beaten to death on the streets in Chicago. His mother's precious tears pierce our defenses, drills down to the inner core of our own grief, and command our compassion. Our guest today is Robert Rand. He knows what it's like to live on the streets in Chicago in a gang. He knows what it's like to go to prison. He knows what it's like to spend a Christmas involved in illegal activity. And he also knows what it's like to be out on the other side and to try to help young people get their lives back into a situation where they are at peace with God. They have the peace of God and at peace with God. We're going to hear from him when we come back from this break. Stay with us.
To reach the studio now, call 877-LIVE-675. Back with more Chris Fabry Live after this break.
Thanks for joining us today for Chris Fabry Live, online at chrisfabrylive.org. Our phone number is toll-free, 1-877-LIVE-675, 1-877-548-3675. Pastor Robert Rand is joining us. He and Tricia are actually in the same class at Moody Theological Seminary and Graduate School. He is now the pastor of Gangs to Grace at NewLife Covenant Church in Chicago. I want to hear his story. I want you to hear it. And I want to have a conversation about a world that most of us never will enter, and yet one that is real and one, the people of which Christ died for, and they need to know that their lives can be changed through His power. I know that you believe in that message, Robert. Thanks for being with us today. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me.
Great to have you in the studio in Chicago there. I hesitate to do this because I know that I'll just sit back and listen for about 20 minutes. But tell me your story. You grew up in Chicago, is that right?
That's right. I grew up on the north side of Chicago in an inner city community, very marginalized area. As I was growing up in the inner city community, I grew up in a very poor community where there's a lot of pressure, outside pressure in our community.
And family unit?
Well, we were a single-family household.
And your mom and dad both in the house?
No, single family is just my mom.
Okay, just your mom. Okay, just your mom raising you. And siblings?
Yes, I have 3 other brothers.
Okay. And at what age then did you get involved in the gang activity?
I started to be curious about gangs when I was about 14 years old. In the inner city, the biggest perception that we see is the only way that you're ever going to get out of your present circumstance is by being a part of a gang or being a part of selling drugs. So I believe the drug aspect is what drew me to gangs. At the age of 15 is when I really started getting involved in it.
Were you recruited, or how did that work?
Well, kind of more like in the community I lived in. I've lived there so long. I kind of just like melted and blended into the community. It wasn't more of a recruitment. Those were my friends and my cousins and my brothers.
Ah, okay. And there were other members then of the family that were involved?
Yes, sir.
Okay. At what, now, you don't have to give us your age, but was this in the 1980s?
88 to 1990 is when I went away.
Okay. And when you say went away, what does that mean?
Well, at the age of 17, I was convicted of attempted murder. Spent the next 6 years of my life in the Illinois Department of Corrections.
And before that, weren't you in juvenile incarceration as well?
I was. And it seems like when you're getting involved in gangs and selling drugs and that type of lifestyle, it's an escalation process. First I started out selling drugs. I got caught for selling drugs, went to the juvenile detention center, came home, went back to the streets. The next day I got caught with a gun. And every time I get caught by the police, the crimes would escalate more and more deeper, and you could see the involvement start to engulf my life.
And you say it was attempted murder, so the person didn't die, but that was in your heart.
Right. Well, I think that initially the person that was the victim of the crime that we perpetrated on him, I really didn't even know him. And that's a sad thing.
And what did somebody else say to you? I want you to go out and kill this person?
Well, it was more of a part of the clique, the family gang that I belonged to. It was more of a favor for one of the family members in the gang.
Okay. Wow. So at 17, then, you're convicted not as a juvenile, but as an adult?
Yes, sir, as an adult.
Okay. And you go to prison for 6 years. And when you get out, the recidivism rate is, huge. People going back into prison. That didn't happen for you. What changed?
What changed was people would bring the love of Jesus Christ into my life. And as I was in my most moldable years, there were great men of God that were incarcerated with me, older gentlemen that had been locked up for many, many years that received the love of Jesus Christ. And they would see young people like me, and they would pour into my life. And they would start talking to me about Jesus Christ, and they would continue to start influencing me in a way that, was very moldable, that would lead me ultimately to go to school. Because when I became incarcerated, I had 8th grade reading and 5th grade math. And it was during the time that I was in prison that God used those years to really educate me.
What did your mom think through all of those years, especially the teenage years when you went away?
Well, I think the biggest thing I could say for my mom was pain. My mom would hurt every single moment that I would spend a day in jail. I would see her cry, but in my ignorance, I would just shake it off like, oh, she's not for real about it. And I think a lot of us misconceive the love that our mothers have for us while we're embracing the things of the world.
Yeah. How did she feel when she heard the news about your conversion then?
Well, my mother, like with everyone else in my family and friends, they were very skeptical. They thought it was just a jailhouse religion, and they really didn't believe I really gave my life to Jesus Christ. For the first couple of years of just receiving Jesus Christ, I really didn't live a Christian life. I was still trying to figure out life. I was a very young man, and as I was seeking and trying to figure out life, God was continuously pulling things out of me, because the conversion wasn't automatic. There was still a lot of things in my life that need to be dealt with. But because I embraced the cross of Christ, he started taking it away as the years went by.
So it was a process. It was a real process for you then.
It was.
Yeah. Robert Rand is our guest today. If you'd like to talk with him, 1-877-LIVE-675. He is pastor of Gangs to Grace at NewLife Covenant Church in Chicago. I want to come back to that and what you try to do, but I have to ask you this, especially as we're coming up to Christmas time. What was it like when you were a young man involved in gang activity and the whole thing of Christmas would come up? Would illegal activity escalate? Would it de-escalate? Did you sit around a tree and have open presents? What would that be like?
Well, I think that depending on when we initiate or label a gang member, we kind of think that the whole life is jacked up and messed up, but it's really not. You have some people that are involved in gangs that do have their mother and their father still at home, and they enjoy a normal Christmas. But for the ones that grew up in a single-family household, the struggle's a little bit more. And I think that the young men, their mothers try to provide the best they can for them so they can enjoy, a regular Christmas. And then for the ones that don't have their family, there's another aspect, is the ones that don't have their families with them, they embrace the streets and whatever the street has to offer them.
And that is one part of the allure of the gang, is it gives you an extended family that is, in some ways, if you know this person will kill someone for you or will take a bullet for you, it bonds you to those other people. Is that right?
It does. But I think that most of the young men that are involved in the gang lifestyle, it's not about the vicious cycle of just taking a life or shooting or hurting somebody. It's more of a brotherhood where you have a bunch of youth that are misguided, that kind of find a fellowship and a brotherhood, that they can hang together, know their security, and know their strength as long as they were together. So I don't think they initially join a gang so they can hurt other people. I think they initially join a gang because they feel the protection. They feel the brotherhood and the belonging.
Yeah. Did you, what happened to your dad?
Well, I just grew up without my father being in the house.
Yeah. But do you know where he is? Or
well, my father's passed away.
Okay. And what about, we were talking about the other day about Tricia, and her apartment was broken into. You said before the program, usually this is not a gang activity of people breaking into people's houses and stealing stuff.
No, it's not. From what I've seen on the streets and from my own personal experiences, the people that are going into these people's apartments and breaking into them are the people that are strung out on drugs, and they're looking to get their next fix. So, they're disregarding people's property and breaking in. And it's not the gang member itself.
But that, it's the gang usually is where they're getting their drugs, so it's kind of a vicious cycle that perpetuates itself, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah. What do you do then, now that you are, your life has been radically changed? What do you do to reach out to those who are embroiled in that gang activity or gang lifestyle, and how do you break through?
Well, the one thing that works is love. Love just casts out a multitude of sin. And, if you're out on the streets and you're getting hardened by just the conditions that are out there, when someone loves on you, you don't know how to understand it, because we're people of reaction. And what I mean by that is, if you came into our neighborhood and you did something, we know how to respond to it, and we know how to hurt you back. If you smack me, I know how to smack you back. But when you love me, it just messes everything up, and I don't know how to respond.
That is true, and there's a biblical example of that as well. Love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. Those aren't just words; that can actually be lived out.
Right.
Huh. How do you do that then? How do you show the love of God to people who, don't know how to receive it?
Well, I wouldn't say that. I believe everyone has the capacity to receive love. I just think that the street and sin hardens our hearts from receiving it. But I know that if people the church people in general, myself, people that are involved in different types of ministry, if we really come authentically to reaching out to these young people, we will definitely see the lives be changed because they can see the authentic love that we have. Because one thing on the streets that you learn, you can spot a phony a mile away. But what happens is when you see someone with real authentic love, then you're more open to hear what he has to say.
As a matter of fact, you said that part of your ministry is to be there when families and people are at their biggest pain point. Describe that.
Well, one of the things that we started to see on the streets is we'd come out with frontline evangelism and we'd minister the gospel to the young people that are in the community. And we noticed that when there were murders or shootings in the community, the young men were more receptive to the gospel of Christ and the presentation that we had for them. They were open to hear what we really had to say because they were hurting and they needed something to fill that hurt and pain in their lives.
What are you studying at Moody?
Well, I'm doing the Master's of Arts in Urban Studies, and it's a degree in understanding and ministering to urban environments.
And how's it going so far? Are you? Is this your first class, or have you been going for a long time?
I've been going for about 2 years, and I'm looking to graduate in May of 2011.
May of 2011. That is great. And I think there are a lot of people around saying, that's so good, and I'm glad there's somebody in Chicago, and I'm sure there are a lot of people in Chicago and in Cleveland and other towns, other cities that are doing this. This really doesn't affect me. And I want to step back from that gang, the symbols and the violence, and just think about what you've talked about with the hardness of hearts. And I totally agree with you that within everyone there is the possibility of that responding to the love of God through somebody else. But I want to take it out of the gang motif and move it over to that person in your family that just has always been the Scrooge or the Grinch or whatever you want to call. You know that they will never, ever, ever respond to the love of God, or that person in your community that you even avoid because you don't want to have any kind of contact with them. That's the person maybe that you need to be thinking of today as we talk about this. Because, Robert, the truth is, especially with the way you said your family responded, that they were skeptical, you were one of those people who they said, it won't ever happen. He'll never respond to God's love.
Right, you are right.
And what was then the breakthrough for you in prison? Was it just one other person putting their arm around you saying, hey, here's the truth, or what happened?
Well, I think that my life was very unique, where several people mentored me and embraced me and really poured into my life. And I think at probably the most hurting times of my life, the gospel penetrated my heart and changed my life forever.
Well, we're going to talk some more with Robert Rand, and if you'd like to ask a question, or maybe you would like to tell us about the turnaround in your own life and how it kind of mirrors what we're talking about in the gang motif again, 1-877-LIVE-675 is our number, 1-877-548-3675. This is Chris Fabry Live. You can find out more about us online and also link to Robert's webpage. We'll tell you more about that. When we come back, you can go to chrisfabrylive.org. Stay with us. Welcome back to Chris Fabry Live online at chrisfabrylive.org. You can reach our studio line at 1-877-LIVE-675. We're talking with Pastor Robert Rand. He is a student at the Moody Graduate School right now, and looking forward to his graduation. He is now pastor of Gangs to Grace at NewLife Covenant Church in Chicago. And we're learning more about the ministry and what's going on there. But I don't want to leave this on the streets of Chicago and have you say, yeah, that's just over there. There's something that you can take away from our conversation here today. And that's what I almost want to go from, like we usually talk about, we go from the micro to the macro, how something happens in a person's life that changes them and how you can use that same thing. So one of the questions I had for you was, in your study at Moody over the last couple of years, have you been able to learn anything in the academic setting that you say, yeah, I need to implement this teaching here that I'm learning in the real world. And what did that look like?
Well, I think every semester I learned something new. I've been fortunate to be under the study of Dr. Feuder, John Feuder. He's a tremendous urban theology guy. He's the doctor that handles most of the courses in the urban major. And he just comes right at you, and he challenges your heart, and he kind of like gives scenarios of things that are happening all over the city. And then he challenges us to try to think of ways that we can change things for the better in our communities.
And what does that look like then? What have you done?
Well, for the one thing, and this happened over a period of time, in the summertime, it was I was in one of his classes, and we had several murders on the Humboldt Park community. And we were reading books by Dr. Perkins about holistically engaging the young men in your communities and really casting vision on their lives. And at the end of the summer, I was so disgusted. I had so many people praying for me because of all these murders. I said, we have to do something more than just come out and preach the gospel of Christ to these young people in order to impact their lives. Because just going out on the streets, we know that God's word doesn't come back void, but we know that it takes more to kind of open up that relationship piece to the kids. So we decided to have a relationship with the community, and we decided to open up a gym for the young men.
And how did they respond to that?
It went very, very well. We started to bring in a lot of resources. I sit on a Humboldt Park Safety Committee where there's about 30 to 50 organizations from the community that sit on this board, and we talk about the community issues. So they would feed me a lot of resources so I can get these young men involved in school, so I can help them get GED reading training. If they didn't know how to read, we want to teach them how to read. If they want to get a high school diploma, we want to have them get a high school diploma. If they wanted to go to college, we really want to try to plug them in so they can start realizing their dream and start seeing their self-worth. Because by being on the street, you really don't realize how special you are when you're created in the image of God. So we lose a lot of who we are by being on the streets.
Yeah. And then the restoration process that you go through, which you've already talked about in your own life. But that is, as you mentioned, Dr. Perkins, John Perkins, that if you would put any word on his life, I would say holistic, because he doesn't want to just deal with the spiritual aspect, as important as that is. It's the whole person. It's the whole deal. And you've got to creatively think about that, so that they will be able to get into society and what a job will do for them, and what will a vision for their life other than selling drugs or doing whatever illegal activity that will gain them money and finances. You got to deal with that. Brandy's in Fayette, Alabama. Hey, Brandy, thanks for calling today. Right ahead.
Okay. How you doing, Mr. Fabry and Mr.
Doing
Rand?
well.
How are you?
Thank
God bless.
I'm all right. I was just calling because growing up in the Bay Area, California, I really identify with what you're talking about. We had lots of gang activity where I'm from, and even though that's the case, that's not really what struck me most. What struck me most is when you were talking about your conversion, the fact that you talked about how the things were drawn out of your life, and the Lord really drew things out of your life one at a time. And I just want to congratulate you for your honesty, because, I was saved at 7 years old, but even now, the Lord is drawing things out of my life, and it's hard for me to identify with an overnight conversion, whereas there are still things in me I feel that the Lord will be working on in me, until I die. I will never attain perfection here on this earth.
Great point, Brandy. I appreciate your call. And Robert, how do you respond to that?
Well, one thing that we do see, it's just God's hand and His grace in our lives. And like she was saying, being transparent is the biggest thing. I know that some people do have an instant conversion where their life radically changes right the moment of conversion. But for a lot of us, it's a continuous struggle. It's a part that builds us up spiritually so we can stand as women and men of God, so we can be dependent upon the source of our life, which is Jesus Christ.
Here's an email from a listener saying, I'm so excited about your topic today. I work in a faith-based after-school tutoring program. We lease a house from the city where we live for $1 a year. That sounds pretty good. And we're located right in the middle of the inner city. These are kids from ages 6 to 17, and if Jesus doesn't get a hold of their hearts, they'll be in gangs. I know they need Jesus, but meanwhile, they aren't Sunday school kids, and I don't expect them to act as such. But what are the boundaries? Yes, they steal, but I can't catch them. Not that I'm trying to set traps or anything. I'm not expressing this well, she says, but I guess I need to understand what my expectations of their behavior should be, especially in the 12 to 17-year-old age range.
Well, what I see with when you look at 12 to 17 years old, the one thing that she has to realize is the only way we're going to break to these kids is to love them. Love casts out a multitude of sin. I can recall a gentleman, he was a pastor. His name was Pastor Norman Leatherwood. He would come into the community and he would minister the gospel, but then he would always show love to us, and he'd always show love to me. Every time he saw me, he greeted me, he prayed with me, he'd invite me to church. And even though I didn't receive it at that time, and I'd say, yeah, to get him away from me, he was planting vital seeds in my life that one day would come into fruition. So the work that she's doing, even though it seems disheartening at times, she is having an impact. It's breaking down the walls. And my encouragement to her is just to continue to love on these young men, because it's her love that's going to break them chains of bondage that they're in.
I used to attend a church in Chicago, and this was, it was probably back in the mid-early 80s, and there was a pretty thriving young people's group that was going on there, and I was part of the, whatever it was, I don't know, I can't even remember what we called it at the time, and there were some really rough kids that were coming to this thing, and I can still remember some of the names of the kids. But there was in the church, and it was a very established church that had been there for a long time, and a lot of the members were a little bit older, and I could just sense that they didn't really like their gymnasium and the church being overrun by kids who were really, really rough. How do you get, especially an older group in your church, to have a vision for what you're talking about?
Well, one of the things that it's hard to really start to transition people's mindsets from where they're at. I think one of the biggest things with me that made our gym so successful, I thought outside the church. Instead of trying to get our church gym itself to reach out to these young people, I went to another organization and I rented their church. That way there's no limitations in the type of ministry that I can do on these young people's lives. That way there's no board trying to come against it. It's just an open arms, like here it is, and I'm able to minister to their lives.
And you're actually going really where they are rather than them, trying to drag them to where you are.
Right. And that's the important thing is when we meet people where they are and we authentically come and reach out to them in love and minister the gospel of Christ, then God can do what he needs to do in their lives. It's not our responsibility to bring somebody to the church. It's our responsibility to share the love of Jesus Christ with them and then let God do his job.
The irony of this is that in that church that I was just talking about and in others around the country, sometimes it's the older people who do have the vision. They know what it's like to be on the street, or they know what a hard life these kids are having, and they do have a great outreach to young kids, and they have a vision for that, when sometimes it's more the middle-aged people who have a problem, who are paying the bills, and they want their church to look nice and it not to be this, that, or the other thing. Do you find that to be true?
Well, one of the things that I found, and this with any church, and I'm just not speaking about my church, is when you start to bring people that we call the least, the undesirable of the community, into your church, people start getting touchy about that. They're kind of unsure of what you're trying to do because it's their kids they're going to interact with. But the way I look at it is when we come authentically and we allow God to just minister to the young people, that's the ultimate goal of any ministry, is to bring the people that are broken, that are considered the least of everybody. And believe me, the gangs are considered the least of a lot of evangelicals around the world. But when we bring them in and we pour the love of Christ and then let God assimilate them in the church, I think the problem with the people is they have a hard time of thinking of mixing the two, my kids and gang members.
Yes. Yes, and that vision, and look at what Jesus did. Look at the pattern that we have from his life. More phone calls coming up right after these messages here on Chris Fabry Live. Robert Rand is our guest.
Call 877-LIVE-675 to reach Chris Fabry Live. That's 877-LIVE-675. Stay with us.
Are you in tune with the Holy Spirit's leadership in your life? I'm Steve Douglas, and Kristen Wassen shares some insight on today's Lighthouse Report.
I believe that having the Holy Spirit at a very young age and just walking with the Lord, He's made me kind of a tender heart. And so, there's a lot of little stories I can think of, but I'll just give you a big one that sounds big, but I think that anyone can do it. And that's really the adoptions that my husband and I have done. And I know that sounds, well, that's a big deal. It is a big deal, but it isn't. It's just loving someone that really needs a parent to come and be a part of your life. And what the Lord taught me through the adoption, we adopted twin daughters at 6 years old, and then we ended up adopting a girl that was their roommate for several years, and she was adopted to another family, and that failed, and we brought her into our home. So she came at 12, and it's a big difference between a 6-year-old and a 12-year-old.
Kristen had a lot to learn.
What the Lord taught me through that was a picture of my salvation, a picture of my adoption into His family. In my mind, I'm picturing these girls would be just so happy to be part of this family and to have a mom and dad, and it was, everything would be great, and we'd walk off into the sunset holding hands. But adoption's a lot of work. Parenting's a lot of work. These are sinful children, and I'm a sinful mom, and we need to, work through this together. What the Lord said to me is, Kristen, you're not that lovable all the time. And you're not grateful for what I'm doing for you all the time, and yet I love you unconditionally. And so, just loving a child. I'm a huge advocate for adoption because there's so many children out there that just need someone to love them with a motherly love, but they need them to love them with the love of Christ. That's filling a need that has really changed lives.
Can you think of people in your life that might need your help this Christmas? Why not show them the unconditional love that Christ demonstrates to you?
Thanks a lot for joining us today. Our remaining moments with Robert Rand, who is pastor of Gangs to Grace at NewLife Covenant Church in Chicago. If you want to know more about him, see his picture there on our website. You can go to chrisfabrylive.org, and we can link you to his website as well, which is mynewlife.org, and then you can go to the section of the website there about Gangs to Grace. Let's go back to the phone and talk with Veril in Orlando. Hi, Veril. Thanks for your call. Go ahead.
How are you, Brother Chris? Brother Robert, God bless you guys. Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas. Same to you.
Thank you. My question is, how do we get to these kids, male and female, before they get into the gang life? The gang life does not allow a lot of the kids to come out alive, as you know, Brother Robert, Brother Chris. If they go to incarceration, they don't come out the same. How do we get to these young kids before the gangs?
Well, one of the things that we see with Gangs to Grace is that one of the preventative pieces that we do is we go to all the organizations that are in our community, social organizations, and we make available to them a workshop on how to notice and how to identify when their kids are being involved in the gangs. First, we educate the parent because we want them to understand, they play a vital role in the lives of their children. Secondly, we come and we reach out to the young people in the community, showing them and talking life into them and giving them vision. Because a lot of times in the inner city, a lot of our kids get beat down and they don't really get to see themselves actualized into what God wanted them to be. So what we do is we kind of meet them right there. And instead of the gangs influencing them and showing them power and authority and, where they are in their status in life, we show them that using the gospel of Christ.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you so much.
All right, Veril, thanks for your question. Here's a question from a person, anonymous person. Did you ever fear for your life either while you were in the gang or after getting out?
Absolutely, I sure did. Several occasions in my life where my life was threatened. I had a pistol put close to my head and by the grace of God, even though the guy clicked the trigger, the bullet didn't come out. So there's been moments in my life that I've been very afraid, and there's been moments of my life where I've been insecure about certain things. But you know what? God has been faithful, and I do believe that even in our disobedience, God's hand of grace is always on our lives.
Are you, I don't know the answer to this question, are you married? Do you have children?
I am married, and I have 5 children.
You have 5 children.
Yes.
Now, do you ever, are you concerned about your kids?
Well, one of the beautiful things with my children is that they're a part of the ministry. They watch my life so closely and the things that I do. And I'm always talking to them about gang involvement and different aspects of that type of lifestyle and how they're blessed to be in the situation that they are in, to where God can, they can look at my life and see God's grace on it. I've taken them to gang rallies where we had a flag to flag, and we had gangs from both different nations in this park, and my kids were right there with us praying with the young men.
That is just too scary. I mean, for people who are outside, you think, well, it's the White Sox and the Cubs fans coming together, and no, this is not like that at all. You've got this is the real thing, right?
It is. But one of the things that we have to realize is, behind all the hard exterior, these are good young boys. It's somebody's father, somebody's son, somebody's daughter, somebody's mother. We have to put flesh on the young people that we're labeling, because as Christian people, or as people in general, it's our habit to label somebody so we can then desensitize the process. So we don't really have to deal with them. They're gang members, they're outcasts. We don't have to deal with them. But what happens is, when we put flesh on them, then we look at them and say, wow, that's someone's little boy.
Yeah.
That's someone's father. Then the reality comes in.
And you don't think, well, this, a lot of people will listen and say, this really doesn't affect a lot of people. Sure, a lot of people in the inner city. Well, here's a call from a mom who said, my oldest son was murdered several years ago. And one of the men involved is now a Christian. And he's become a son to her. And her question to you is, how can I best help him and encourage him?
Well, one of the biggest things you've already done for him is you granted him forgiveness. And that's the biggest piece. And by you granting him that forgiveness, he has peace within his soul. And then you loved him, and you loved on his life. And you've already helped him enough. You're really pouring into his life without even doing anything.
Yeah, and it's such an organic thing too. I mean, when you realize that other person is in the body of Christ, you can't help but love them. And yet, I'm sure that there is that aspect of, yes, but I've had this big loss in my life, and if it weren't for people like this other person, I'd still have my son. And so you go through the physical or the earthly thoughts that certainly would come up. You probably lost friends and acquaintances of your own when you were in the gang, didn't you?
I did.
How did you deal with it?
Well, I think that initially when you lose your loved ones or your friends, there's always hurt and pain. And there's always, for us, like I said, in the inner city communities, we want to react to what our losses were. You know what I mean? Yeah. But I think that it's a process. As we we have to process it and then let it go, because ultimately that's what happens. We do have to let our loved one go.
Paul is in Peoria and wants to talk with Robert. Hi, Paul. Go right ahead.
Hello, Robert. Hello, Chris. Merry Christmas to both of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
My question, I guess, relating to a little bit of what Robert himself went through. I was involved in a gang back home in India, and for many years, and about 12 years ago, turned my life around, and when the Lord took hold of me, and so praise God for that, and praise God for Robert too. The question I have is this: the people who ministered to me when I was going through these, I guess, illegitimate activities. They were more of a cut and dry, here's the truth, whether you like it or not, here's the truth. And that enraged me a lot when I was growing up, because it didn't agree with what I was going through. Did that happen to you, or how did the people minister to you, and how do you today minister to others?
Well, absolutely. I think that's part of just people really wanting to do the will of God. They reach out to the community and they just come with what they know. And a lot of them, this is what the Bible says, and this is the reality of your situation. This is what you need to do. I think, that's the first cut of people that really don't, they mean well, but they really don't understand your situation that you're in. The key that I do when I minister to young people is I try to build relationships. I try to get to know the person for who they are and try to minister to the needs with not a judgmental eye. It's not my job to judge the people. It's my job to love on them.
Yes. And that was what the emailer came back and said, having the question about, if Jesus doesn't get a hold of these hearts in the after school. She said, thanks for that reminder to just keep loving them. It helps me keep things in perspective, and especially this time of year, to think of what Jesus did for us. That's what he did. He left heaven's glories to come here and to live for us. You got a lot of stories of people whose lives have changed. 30 seconds. Can you tell us one?
Yes, there's a young man by the name of Anthony Orsini. He came home from the penitentiary, and he was working with another gentleman from, I forgot the name, Willow Church. And they brought him to our gym. And then one night during our gym activity, God really spoke to his heart, and he took himself off of county, took the brother Ron Gorney over to the community he was involved in, and they went in front of all the gang members and said, you know what, I got to give my life to Christ. This brother gave his life to Christ, and now he's living for the Lord and serving him faithfully.
Wow. That kind of change, that kind of new life is what we want to talk about. Robert, thanks for your work. God bless you. I will encourage our listeners to pray for you and go to our website and find out more about the ministry. It's chrisfabrylive.org. Go there and find out more about Robert Rand's ministry. Thank you for listening. Dave Carter's going to join us tomorrow right here on Chris Fabry Live, a production of Moody Radio in Chicago.